I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times. The hum of the car engine as I pulled up to the house, the way the tires would crunch on the gravel driveway, and the look on Lauren's face when she saw me again. 18 months of hell, fighting tooth and nail to stay alive, had all been fueled by the thought of coming home, of walking through the front door and holding my family close. But when the moment finally came, it didn't look anything like I'd dreamed. The house was still the same. A little two-story place with blue shutters and the porch swing I'd hung for Lauren the summer before my last deployment. But there were differences too, things I noticed immediately. A brand new SUV sat in the driveway, sleek and shiny, with rims that probably cost more than my entire first car. The flower beds, which Lauren always complained she never had time for, were now perfectly manicured. Even the porch looked different, the old rocking chair replaced by something modern and expensive. For a moment, I told myself to let it go. Maybe life had gone on without me. Maybe Lauren had worked hard to make things nice for Noah, to keep things normal. But when I stepped out of the car and heard Noah's voice, everything changed. "Daddy's alive!" he shouted, running out the front door. His little sneakers slapped against the porch steps as he ran toward me, his arms outstretched. "Daddy's alive. But Mommy and Uncle Nathan already used your money." The words hit me like a brick to the chest. My son's joy was pure, untainted by the weight of what he'd just said. But for me, it was like the world tilted, everything suddenly out of place. I scooped him up, holding him tight as my heart pounded. Over his shoulder, I saw Lauren step onto the porch. Her face turned pale, her hands trembling as she clutched the doorframe. And behind her, like a ghost from my past, stood Nathan Blake. Nathan, my best friend. The man who'd been like a brother to me, who'd held my son the day he was born and made promises to look after my family when I was deployed. Lauren was the first to speak, her voice shaky and faint. "Ethan, you're alive." Nathan stood frozen, his expression a mix of shock and guilt. I wanted to believe this was all some misunderstanding, some cruel coincidence, but the way they looked at me told me everything I needed to know. The next hour was a blur. I barely registered Lauren's rushed explanations or Nathan's stammered excuses. What I did hear, loud and clear, was that they declared me dead. 18 months ago, when news of the ambush reached home and I was listed as missing in action, they jumped at the chance to collect my military death benefits. While I was scraping by in the mountains of Afghanistan, they'd been living it up. New cars, vacations, renovations to the house. They'd spent the money like it was a lottery jackpot. And they'd done it together. Mrs. Thompson, our neighbor, had been outside watering her plants when I arrived. Now she stood at the edge of the driveway, her jaw tight and her eyes darting between me and the porch. I could feel the weight of her pity and anger, and I hated it. Hated being the center of a betrayal so deep it made my skin crawl. Noah, oblivious to the tension, tugged on my sleeve. "Daddy, did you see the swimming pool? Uncle Nathan got it for me." I forced a smile for him, my heart breaking. "I'll check it out later, buddy." I couldn't stay. Not right then. My fists clenched at my sides as I stepped back, turning toward my car. Lauren called after me, her voice pleading, but I didn't look back. If I did, I wasn't sure what I'd do or say. I drove aimlessly, the town blurring past me. The streets I'd grown up on, the diner where Lauren and I had shared milkshakes on our first date, the park where I'd pushed Noah on the swings. All of it felt foreign now, tainted. Eventually, I found myself at a rest stop overlooking the river. The sound of rushing water calmed me, grounding me as my mind raced. Questions came in waves, crashing over me faster than I could process them. How long had this been going on? Was it just about the money? Had there been something between Lauren and Nathan even before I left? One thing was clear. The life I'd fought so hard to come back to was gone. Whatever love or loyalty had once been there had been replaced by greed and betrayal. But I wasn't about to let them take everything from me. Not without a fight. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I made a vow to myself. I'd figure out the truth, every last detail. And when I did, I'd reclaim what was mine. Not just my home or my money, but my dignity, my honor. This wasn't the homecoming I dreamed of, but it wasn't the end of my story either. Not by a long shot. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just sting, it festers. Every minute after stepping away from that house felt like a new layer of pain peeling back. I'd survived the worst the world could throw at me overseas, only to come home and find that the real battle was waiting here, where I least expected it. I wasn't about to fight this alone. That's where Olivia Brooks came in. Olivia was a military lawyer with a reputation for digging into the darkest corners and pulling out the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. When I told her my story, I half expected her to look at me like I was exaggerating. Instead, she leaned forward, her jaw tightening as I finished. "They used your death benefits," she said, her voice sharp, "to play house while you were fighting to stay alive. And they falsified documents to do it. That's not just betrayal, Ethan. That's fraud and a federal offense." The thought of Lauren and Nathan sitting in that house, using a system I'd bled for to line their pockets, made my fists clench. "Where do we start?" "Paperwork," Olivia said, already scribbling notes. "And proof." Over the next week, Olivia and I pieced together the trail they'd left behind. It didn't take long to uncover the biggest lie of all. They'd expedited my death certificate by presenting false evidence. Lauren had turned in a signed affidavit, claiming my belongings had been returned from the battlefield. The proof? A photo of my wristwatch, scratched and bloodied, the one I'd lost during the ambush. "They said this was found on a soldier killed in the attack," Olivia explained, sliding the file toward me. "But your name wasn't on the recovered remains report. Someone made sure this watch ended up in the right hands to back up their story." The sight of that watch turned my stomach. I carried it with me on every deployment, a gift from Lauren before we got married. Seeing it now, twisted into evidence of my supposed death, made my blood boil. "This wasn't an accident," I said. "They planned this." Olivia nodded. "And we're going to prove it." While Olivia worked the legal angle, I focused on Noah. The court had granted me supervised visitation, something I never thought I'd have to fight for. But here I was, jumping through hoops just to spend time with my own son. The visits were bittersweet. Noah was as bright and curious as ever, but his innocent questions cut deep. "Daddy, are you staying at Uncle Nathan's house now?" he asked one afternoon as we played with toy cars at the community center. I paused, forcing a smile.
"No, Buddy.
"I've got my own place." "Oh," he frowned, considering this. "But Uncle Nathan says we're a family now. Mommy too." Hearing those words from him felt like a punch to the gut. But I couldn't let my anger show. Noah was just a kid, caught in a mess he didn't create. He didn't need my rage. He needed my patience and love. "I'll always be your family, Noah," I said, pulling him into a hug. "No matter what." The breakthroughs came in pieces, like assembling a puzzle you didn't want to finish. Mrs. Thompson was the first to step forward. She'd always been a quiet presence in the neighborhood, but when she saw what I was going through, she couldn't stay silent. "I kept notes," she said one afternoon, handing me a worn notebook. I didn't know what else to do. The notebook was a treasure trove of observations, dates, times, and details about Lauren and Nathan's actions. She'd noticed Nathan spending more time at the house months before my supposed death, and after the benefits money came through, the changes were undeniable. Luxury items delivered to the door, contractors renovating the backyard, expensive trips disguised as business. "It wasn't just spur of the moment," she said softly. "They planned this, Ethan, and they used you to do it." Her words were hard to hear, but they fueled my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about showing Noah what it meant to stand up for what's right. Olivia's investigation revealed more layers of deceit. Nathan had funneled some of the death benefits into private accounts under his name, ensuring he'd have a financial safety net if things went south. Lauren had signed off on everything, her name appearing on every critical document. "They didn't just betray you," Olivia said during one of our late-night strategy sessions. "They exploited the system. This goes beyond personal betrayal. It's criminal." "Then let's make sure they face the consequences," I said. "All of them." Every day brought new challenges, but I stayed focused on the goal. exposing the truth and reclaiming my life. I thought about Noah constantly, about what kind of example I wanted to set for him. He deserved to know that honesty and loyalty mattered, that even when people let you down, you had to rise above it. When the weight of it all felt too heavy, I reminded myself of the promise I'd made during those long months overseas, to come home and protect my family. Even if family looked different now, that promise hadn't changed. The truth was coming to light, piece by piece. And while it hurt to uncover how deep the betrayal went, it also gave me strength. This wasn't just about getting justice for myself. It was about building a foundation for something better, something Noah could grow up believing in. Starting over wasn't new to me. After every deployment, I'd come home and adjust to life outside the wire, finding my footing, reconnecting with my family, and rebuilding routines. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't just rebuilding my life, I was preparing for a fight. The small apartment I moved into wasn't much, but it was mine. The walls were bare, the furniture was secondhand, and the hum of traffic outside reminded me I was back in the world. It wasn't the home I dreamed of returning to, but it gave me space to think and plan. Every time I looked at the worn American flag folded on my nightstand, I reminded myself of why I was doing this. For Noah, for truth, and for the promise I made to myself when I was trapped halfway around the world. Eric Flores walked into my life like a godsend. We'd met years ago during a joint military FBI operation, and though we hadn't spoken in a while, his reputation as a sharp investigator hadn't dulled one bit. When he heard about my situation through mutual contacts, he didn't hesitate to reach out. "Ethan, you've been through hell," he said as we sat at a diner near my apartment. "Let me help you put this right." Eric's background was perfect for what I needed. He had a nose for corruption and knew how to follow trails most people wouldn't even see. Together, we started tracing Nathan's activities, looking for the cracks in his story. What we found was bigger than either of us expected. Nathan wasn't just manipulating my death benefits. Through his company, he'd been expediting payouts for other military families as well. It all seemed noble on the surface, helping grieving families get the funds they needed quickly. But when we dug deeper, a pattern emerged. Nathan's cousin, Lopez, worked at a forensics lab contracted by the military. His role? Verifying personal effects recovered from fallen soldiers. Turns out Lopez had been fabricating evidence, like the watch they used to declare me dead, to fast-track payments for families. Nathan's company would skim a percentage of those payouts under the guise of processing fees. It wasn't just fraud, it was exploitation. They were taking advantage of families during their most vulnerable moments, turning tragedy into profit. Eric slammed the file shut after reviewing the evidence. "This isn't just about you anymore, Ethan. This is a system they've been running for years." I nodded, my resolve hardening. Then we shut it down. In the midst of everything, my time with Noah became my anchor. The supervised visits weren't ideal, but they gave me a chance to reconnect with my son. Every moment with him reminded me of what I was fighting for. We spent hours at the park, throwing a baseball back and forth or feeding ducks by the pond. Noah's questions often caught me off guard, his innocent perspective forcing me to think on my feet. "Daddy, why don't you live with us anymore?" he asked one afternoon, his small hand clutching mine as we walked. I knelt down, meeting his eyes. "Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt people, buddy. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." He nodded, though I could see the confusion lingering in his expression. "Uncle Nathan says you're a hero." Hearing Nathan's name in the same sentence as hero made my stomach churn. But I kept my tone steady. A hero is someone who does what's right, even when it's hard. Remember that. Okay? Okay, Daddy. Those moments with Noah fueled me. No matter how much Lauren and Nathan had taken, they couldn't take the bond one was rebuilding with my son. While I played the role of a quiet, defeated veteran around Lauren and Nathan, my private life was a different story. I documented everything. Every flashy purchase, every social appearance, every moment they flaunted their ill-gotten gains. They thought I was broken, that I'd given up, but I was watching, waiting, and gathering the evidence I needed to bring them down. Marcus Harper joined the effort next. A cybersecurity expert and an old friend of Eric's, Marcus had a knack for peeling back layers of digital deception. With his help, we tracked Nathan and Lauren's financial transactions. What we found wasn't just incriminating, it was damning. Trips to tropical resorts, designer clothing purchases, deposits into private offshore accounts. They'd spent nearly all of my death benefits, and they weren't stopping. Marcus even uncovered connections to shell companies Nathan had set up to launder money from the fraudulent payouts. It's like they're daring someone to catch them, Marcus said, scrolling through the records on his laptop. But they're sloppy. They've left a trail a mile wide. That trail was exactly what I needed. As the pieces fell into place, my long-term strategy came into focus. This wasn't just about getting back at Lauren and Nathan. It was about making sure Noah had a future he could be proud of. I wasn't going to let him grow up thinking deceit and greed were acceptable. Every step I took was calculated. Every piece of evidence we gathered was another step closer to the truth. It wasn't easy, and there were nights when the weight of it all threatened to crush me. But then I'd think about Noah, about the kind of man I wanted him to see when he looked at his father. That thought kept me going. The fight wasn't over yet, but the pieces were finally coming together. With Eric, Marcus, and Olivia on my side, I had a team I could trust. And with every move Nathan and Lauren made, they dug themselves deeper into a hole they wouldn't be able to climb out of. This wasn't just about exposing their lies, it was about showing them, and the world, that the truth always comes out. And when it did, I'd be ready. If I didn't know the truth, I'd think Nathan and Lauren had the perfect life. Every weekend, they were at charity galas, hobnobbing with the city's elite, dressed in clothes that screamed wealth and sophistication. They'd become fixtures at exclusive clubs, the kind of places where people sipped champagne while pretending to change the world. From the outside, it looked like they'd found their happily ever after. But I knew better, and they had no idea I was the one pulling the strings. My plan was simple: let them rise. The higher they climbed, the more visible they became. And the more visible they became, the easier it was to expose them. I made sure their activities stayed on the radar, not enough to spook them, but enough to keep the receipts piling up. Nathan's fraud network was growing, his West Coast connections creating an even bigger trail of dirty money. With Marcus's help, I tracked every transaction, every shady deal. Marcus called it digital breadcrumbs, and Nathan was leaving plenty of them. "He thinks he's untouchable," Marcus said one night as we pored over another batch of financial records. "But he's making it easy for us." "That's exactly what I want," I replied. "Let him think he's won. It'll hurt more when the fall comes." Noah was my anchor through it all. Olivia had worked her magic, helping me secure more visitation rights, including overnight stays. The first night he slept in my apartment, he ran straight to the futon I'd set up for him and declared it his fort. "Do you like it?" I asked, kneeling beside him as he arranged his favorite stuffed animals. "It's awesome, Daddy," he said, beaming. Then, after a moment of hesitation, he added, "Can we build a real fort someday? Like with wood and nails?" I ruffled his hair. "You bet we can." Those moments gave me hope. For every gala Nathan and Lauren attended, for every fake smile they wore in public, there was this, a real connection, untainted by lies. And I'd do whatever it took to protect it. At school events, Nathan made a show of being the perfect father figure. He'd stand next to Lauren, shaking hands with other parents, his arm casually draped over her shoulder. Noah didn't understand the implications, of course. To him, Nathan was just Uncle Nathan, a man who brought him gifts and showed up to his soccer games. I stayed quiet during those events, playing the role of the reserved ex-husband. But every interaction was another piece of evidence. Every handshake, every staged family photo, every whispered comment between Nathan and Lauren. It all went into the file I was building. Lauren, though, was starting to crack. She wasn't as good at hiding her unease as Nathan was. Sometimes, during school events or pickups, I'd catch her glancing at me, her expression flickering between confusion and something else. Unease, maybe. She was sensing something, though I knew she hadn't figured out my plan yet. That suited me just fine. Let her wonder. The game shifted when Marcus uncovered the emails. Late one night, As I sat in my apartment going over notes, my phone buzzed with a message from him. "We need to talk. Now." I called immediately, and Marcus didn't waste time. "Lauren's planning to leave the country." "What?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. "She's been emailing a real estate agent in Costa Rica," Marcus explained. "Looking at properties, talking about moving there with Noah. And get this, she's using money from fraudulent claims to fund it." I gripped the phone tighter. "When?" "Soon," Marcus replied. "She hasn't nailed down a date, but the agent's been asking for confirmation." The thought of Lauren taking Noah away, of uprooting his life and dragging him into their mess, made my blood boil. But anger wouldn't solve this. Action would. The next morning, Olivia and I met to discuss options. She wasted no time filing an emergency petition to restrict Noah's travel. By the end of the day, I had court orders in hand that prevented Lauren from taking him out of the state, let alone the country. When I delivered the paperwork to Lauren's house, her reaction was exactly what I expected. "You have no right," she started, her face flushed with anger. "I have every right." I cut in, my voice calm but firm. "You don't get to take Noah away because you're running from your mistakes." Her mouth opened, then closed again. She had no rebuttal, no way to explain herself. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. Nathan's network continued expanding, oblivious to the trap I was setting. He'd begun courting new clients on the West Coast, using his connections to pitch his fraudulent services as legitimate. But with every deal he made, every partnership he formed, he was creating a bigger paper trail. "He's not just sloppy, he's reckless," Marcus said during one of our meetings. "At this rate, he's going to incriminate half his network." "Good," I replied. "The higher he climbs, the harder he'll fall." Through it all, my focus never wavered. Noah. I cherished every moment I had with him, teaching him about honesty, integrity, and what it meant to stand for something. "Why do you always tell me the truth, Daddy?" he asked one night as I tucked him in. "Because the truth matters," I said simply. "Even when it's hard, it's always the right thing to do." He nodded, his small hand clutching mine. "I want to tell the truth too." Those words gave me more strength than he'd ever know. The facade Nathan and Lauren had built was cracking, and when it finally shattered, they'd have nowhere to hide. Veterans Day had always meant something to me. It wasn't just a holiday. It was a reminder of the people who'd served, the sacrifices made, and the lives changed forever. So when I heard Nathan and Lauren would be headlining the town's Veterans Day Gala, flaunting their wealth and spinning lies about how they helped military families, I knew it was the perfect stage for their downfall. Every piece of the plan had led to this moment. Months of work with Olivia, Marcus, and Eric had uncovered every layer of their fraud. The documents, the fabricated evidence, the shell companies, it was all packaged and ready for the authorities. Now, it was time to show the world who Nathan and Lauren really were. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the town's civic center, a place meant to honor service and sacrifice. It was a beautiful setting, but the sight of Nathan and Lauren laughing and mingling among the guests turned my stomach. Nathan wore a sharp suit, his confidence radiating as he shook hands with local officials and business leaders. Lauren stood beside him in an elegant gown, her smile as polished as the diamond necklace around her neck. To anyone watching, they were the picture of success. Generous, respectable, untouchable. I stood at the back of the room, dressed in my marine blues, blending into the crowd. No one paid much attention to me, which was exactly what I wanted. Across the room, Eric and Olivia sat at separate tables, their eyes scanning the scene. Marcus had coordinated with the FBI, and several agents were stationed throughout the ballroom, waiting for the signal. As the evening progressed, Nathan took the stage for his speech. He began with a smooth, practiced tone, weaving a story about his company's commitment to military families. He talked about the sacrifices made by service members and how his business was dedicated to easing the burden on their loved ones. It was disgusting. Every word out of his mouth was a lie, a mockery of the very values he claimed to uphold. But the crowd ate it up, nodding along and clapping at all the right moments. That's when I saw Olivia give the subtle nod from her seat. The time had come. The FBI agents moved in quietly at first, weaving through the crowd toward the stage. Nathan was still mid-sentence, unaware of the storm about to hit. When the lead agent stepped onto the stage, holding up his badge, the room fell silent. "Nathan Blake," the agent said, his voice echoing through the ballroom. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and theft of government funds." For a moment, Nathan froze, his confident facade cracking. "There must be some mistake," he stammered. "I don't." The agent cut him off. "Save it for your lawyer." Gasps rippled through the crowd as the agents handcuffed him. Lauren, standing near the front row, looked like she'd seen a ghost. When another agent approached her, reading her rights, her knees buckled, and she had to be steadied as the cuffs went on. The neighbors and community leaders who'd once admired them were whispering now, their faces a mix of shock and disgust. The perfect facade had shattered, and there was no putting it back together. I stepped forward then, my marine blues catching the attention of the crowd. All eyes turned to me as I climbed the steps to the stage. Nathan glared at me, his face red with fury, but he couldn't say a word. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady and clear. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ethan Carter. I served with the United States Marine Corps for 12 years. I'm also the husband Lauren declared dead and the man Nathan betrayed for his own gain." The room was silent except for the muffled sobs of Lauren. I scanned the crowd, meeting their stunned gazes. For over a year, Nathan and Lauren have lied to this community. They've stolen money meant for military families, manipulated the system, and used my service as a stepping stone for their greed. They stood here tonight pretending to honor veterans while disrespecting everything we stand for. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. This isn't just about me. It's about every soldier who put their life on the line, trusting that the people back home would honor their sacrifice. Betrayals like this cut deeper than any wound. But tonight, justice is being served. The applause started slow, hesitant, before growing into a roar. People who had once cheered for Nathan and Lauren were now clapping for the truth, for the reckoning that had finally come. As Nathan and Lauren were led out in handcuffs, I stepped down from the stage. Mrs. Thompson caught my arm as I passed, her eyes wet with tears. "Ethan," she said softly, "I'm so sorry for what you've been through." I nodded, offering a faint smile. "Thank you." The crowd parted as I walked toward the exit, the whispers following me. I didn't care about their pity or their shock. All that mattered was that the truth was out, and Noah's future was safe. That night, as I tucked Noah into bed at my apartment, he looked up at me with wide, curious eyes. "Daddy, what happened to Uncle Nathan?" I hesitated, unsure how much to say. "Uncle Nathan made some bad choices, buddy. But you don't have to worry about that anymore." Noah nodded, his small hand clutching mine. "You're my hero, Daddy." I kissed his forehead, my heart swelling. "And you're mine." The charade was over. Nathan and Lauren were exposed, their empire of lies in ruins. Now I could finally focus on what mattered most. Rebuilding my life with Noah, one honest step at a time. When the dust finally settled, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in years. Nathan and Lauren's betrayal had left scars, but with them in custody, the long process of rebuilding could finally begin. Not just for me, but for the countless other families they'd hurt along the way. The investigation revealed more than I could have imagined. Nathan's fraud network had siphoned over $30 million from military death benefits, exploiting a system meant to honor sacrifice and support grieving families. It wasn't just my story anymore. It was the story of dozens of families who'd been manipulated and robbed. The Morrison Protocol came about because of my case. It wasn't just a name slapped on legislation. It was a promise that no one else would go through what I did. The protocol introduced stricter verification processes for military death claims, ensuring that evidence submitted couldn't be fabricated or manipulated. During the announcement, I stood alongside lawmakers and military officials, my uniform pressed and my heart heavy. As I spoke to the crowd, I didn't just share my story. I shared the stories of those who couldn't fight back, of families who deserved better. This isn't just about catching the bad guys, I said. It's about protecting the good ones. It's about making sure no family has to question the integrity of the system that's supposed to honor their sacrifices. The applause that followed wasn't for me. It was for the change we'd fought to make. Back at home, Noah was adjusting to life with just the two of us. It wasn't perfect. There were hard questions and moments when he missed the life he'd known before. But I was determined to give him a home filled with love, honesty, and stability. Every morning, we'd make pancakes together, laughing as he tried to flip them without making a mess. In the evenings, we'd build forts out of couch cushions and share stories, his little voice eager and curious. One night, as we lay in our fort, Noah turned to me, his eyes serious. "Daddy, are you sad about Mommy and Uncle Nathan?" I thought about how to answer. "I'm sad about what they did," I said honestly. "But I'm happy we have each other. That's what matters." He nodded, snuggling closer. "I'm happy too." In those moments, I realized that rebuilding wasn't just about fixing what was broken. It was about creating something new. Eric and Marcus stayed in the fight, helping to dismantle the remnants of Nathan's fraud network. Every shell company uncovered, every transaction traced, brought us closer to closing the book on this chapter for good. Eric, ever the pragmatist, kept me updated on their progress, while Marcus celebrated each small victory with a triumphant fist pump. "It's not just about justice," Marcus said during one of our calls. "It's about restoring trust. These families need to know someone's looking out for them." Couldn't have agreed more. As for Lauren and Nathan, their sentences were fitting. Lauren received 15 years for her role in the fraud, while Nathan's deeper involvement earned him 25 years behind bars. The once polished image they'd cultivated faded into obscurity, their names remembered only in connection with their crimes. There was no satisfaction in their downfall, just a quiet sense of closure. They'd made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. Healing wasn't a straight path, but day by day, it became easier. Noah and I planted a garden in our backyard, the small patch of earth becoming a symbol of growth and resilience. As the flowers bloomed, so did our bond. I taught him about resilience, honor, and standing up for what's right. He soaked it all in, his young mind curious and eager to understand the world. "Daddy," he said one evening as we watched the sunset from the porch, "you're the strongest person I know." I smiled, my heart swelling with pride. "That's because I've got you, buddy." Life didn't magically become perfect, but it became ours. The pain of betrayal lingered, but it no longer defined me. Instead, I found strength in the love of my son, in the families we'd helped, and in the knowledge that the truth had prevailed. The Morrison Protocol ensured that no one else would fall victim to the kind of fraud Nathan had orchestrated. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace, knowing that our story had brought about change. As Noah drifted off to sleep that night, I sat by his bed, watching his chest rise and fall with each peaceful breath. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. We'd face it together, with honesty, resilience, and a commitment to doing what was right. Because in the end, that's what matters most. The air was crisp and cool as I stood on the parade ground at West Point, watching Noah lead his unit in formation. His uniform was sharp, his steps precise, and his voice carried with the same confidence I'd heard growing in him over the years. He was a cadet now, following in my footsteps and blazing his own trail. Pride swelled in my chest as I saw the young man he'd become. Resilient, strong, honorable. Everything I'd hoped to teach him, he carried with him now. This wasn't just my son, it was my legacy. It hadn't been an easy road, but it had been worth every step. After years of work, the Morrison Protocol had become standard policy across all branches of the military. Its stringent verification process saved countless families from falling victim to fraud, ensuring the sacrifices of service members were honored with integrity and care. The protocol wasn't just about catching criminals. It was about building trust, about showing families that the system they relied on wouldn't fail them. Seeing it in action, knowing it had come from my struggle, filled me with a sense of purpose I'd never known before. My story had become more than just a personal tale. It had become a lesson. At military academies across the country, Cadets studied the events that led to the Morrison Protocol as a case in resilience, reform, and the fight for justice. My name wasn't the focus. Noah had once joked that they called me Sergeant Anonymous in the lessons. But the lessons endured. It wasn't about me. It was about the message. That standing up for what's right can change not just your life, but the lives of others. Life had changed in other ways too. Olivia and I had found each other during the hardest chapter of my life, and over the years, our partnership had grown into something neither of us expected. We'd built a home filled with laughter, honesty, and the kind of love I once thought I'd lost forever. She stood beside me now, her hand resting on my arm as we watched Noah lead his unit. "He's incredible," she whispered, her voice filled with pride. "He is," I said, my voice catching in my throat. "More than I ever imagined." Mrs. Thompson, now in her 80s, was still part of our family. She'd been there for us in ways that no one else had, her steadfast loyalty and kindness leaving an indelible mark on my life. Noah adored her, and she adored him right back. At family dinners, she'd sit at the head of the table, telling stories about the neighborhood's history and occasionally scolding me for not eating enough. "You're still too skinny, Ethan," she'd say, shaking her head. "A man needs a proper meal." She was family, and we honored her in every way we could. Her unwavering belief in me during my darkest days had helped me find the strength to fight back. As for Nathan and Lauren, their names had faded into obscurity. Their betrayal, once the center of my pain, was now little more than a cautionary tale, a warning about the consequences of greed and dishonesty. People didn't remember them. They remembered what their actions had taught us about resilience, justice, and reform. And that was enough. On the day Noah graduated from West Point, I stood with Olivia and Mrs. Thompson, watching him accept his commission as an officer. The applause was thunderous, and as he saluted his fellow cadets, I saw a glimmer of the boy he'd once been, the one who'd asked me why honesty mattered, who'd built forts in our living room and dreamed of big adventures. When the ceremony ended, Noah found me in the crowd, his face beaming. "Did I make you proud, Dad?" I pulled him into a hug, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. "You've always made me proud, son." That night, as I sat on the porch watching the stars, I reflected on how far we'd come. Betrayal had once defined my life, threatening to tear apart everything I'd built. But it had also been the foundation for change, for justice, for reform, for a legacy that would outlive me. Noah's laughter echoed from inside the house, and Olivia's voice joined his, warm and full of love. The future felt bright, not just for us, but for everyone touched by the work we'd done. Betrayal may have started my story, but honor and resilience would finish it. And that, I realized, was a legacy worth leaving behind. Life has a way of surprising you. Years ago, if someone had told me that the worst betrayal of my life would lead to a mission that would define my future, I wouldn't have believed them. But sitting on the porch of our peaceful home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I could see the bigger picture clearly. The fight against betrayal hadn't just restored my life. It had transformed it into something greater. The Morrison Protocol had become a cornerstone of military family support, and Olivia had taken on the mantle of reform. Her tireless efforts to advocate for transparency and protection in the system had sparked initiatives across the country, reshaping how benefits were handled and how families were supported during their most vulnerable moments. "Every family we protect is a victory," she said during one of our quiet evenings. "And it all started with you." I reached for her hand, a smile tugging at my lips. "It started with us. You were there when I needed you most." Our journey together had been anything but ordinary, but the life we built, a life of trust, love, and purpose, was a testament to the power of second chances. Our blended family was the heart of it all, and every laugh, every shared meal, every quiet moment felt like a gift. Noah had grown into a leader who carried both strength and compassion. West Point had sharpened his skills, but his heart was what truly set him apart. His integrity was unshakable, his belief in doing the right thing unwavering. One evening, he handed me a stack of papers. "It's my final project," he said, his voice steady but nervous. "It's about you." The title caught my eye, One Man's Fight for Justice. How Integrity Can Change the System. I skimmed the pages, my chest tightening as I read his words. He wrote about the betrayal, the investigation, and the reforms that followed. But more than that, he wrote about the lessons he'd learned, about resilience, honor, and the importance of standing up for what's right. Your journey showed me that one person can make a difference, he said quietly as I finished reading. That's what I want to do too. I couldn't speak for a moment, overcome by the pride swelling in my chest. You already are, son, I finally managed. You already are. Meanwhile, Marcus and Eric continued their work, uncovering fraud and corruption in areas that had long gone unchecked. Every time I spoke with them, their dedication reminded me of why we'd started this fight in the first place. There's always more to do, Marcus said during one of our calls. But every case we close, every system we fix, it's worth it. Eric chimed in, his tone as pragmatic as ever. You set the standard, Ethan. We're just following your lead. Their words humbled me. I wasn't the hero they made me out to be. I was just a man who refused to let the wrongs in his life go unanswered. But seeing the ripple effect of our work gave me a sense of peace I hadn't known before. As the years passed, the world around us continued to evolve, but the principles we'd fought for remained steadfast. Noah's journey as a leader, Olivia's reforms, and the ongoing work of Marcus and Eric ensured that our mission would endure long after we were gone. One evening, as I sat on the porch with Olivia by my side and Noah's laughter ringing out from inside the house, I thought about the journey we'd taken. Betrayal had once defined my life, threatening to consume me. But now, it was a distant memory, a shadow that had been eclipsed by the light of truth, honor, and resilience. The world wasn't perfect, but it was better, and that was enough. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the yard, I closed my eyes and let the warmth of the moment wash over me. My journey had been far from easy, but it had been worth every step. Because in the end, it wasn't just about exposing the fraud or holding people accountable. It was about leaving the world a little better than I'd found it. And for that, I was grateful.